All right, we're gonna be painting roses. And we're going to do a front-facing rose and then turn it a little bit, do a 3/4 side-facing rose, and then turn it a little bit more and do a complete side-facing rose. So there are a couple of strokes that you really want to pay attention to when you're painting roses. And let me just show you. You're going to want to pay attention to pressing down on your brush and then pulling up again. This motion is going to be really important when we're building our rose. I'll show you that in a moment. You're also going to be curving your brush stroke. So pressing down and then curving back up. It's not going to be perfect, but you just want to get that motion of pressing down and then pulling up so that you have that kind of thin with the thick. And don't worry about it being perfect, because roses in nature are not perfect, and the more kind of organic it looks, the better with loose floral. So you can choose any color. I've got quinacridone rose, and then I've mixed a little bit of rose doré in there. I don't like to fully mix my color because I kind of like those little nuances that happen when it's not fully mixed. So you want to start with just a dot in the center. I got a little bit too much paint, so I'm trying to pick that up so it's not like a little puddle right there. And then from there, I'm going to start these little C curves, and they're going to be pretty fine. I'm not pressing down a lot right here. And then as I work my way out, I'm pressing down a little bit more gradually. Now with roses, you want to make sure that you leave a little bit of white space, because that helps define the shape. If you only overlap, it's just going to come out looking like a circle. It's not going to look like a rose at all. So that is the basic rose. Now, we'll wait for this to dry, and then we can go back and add depth to the center right here. But I want to show you just one more approach to this exact rose to just add a little bit more character. So I'm going to start with, let's do alizarin crimson. We'll start with a deeper color. And I'm going to do the same thing. Start with that dot and then kind of start working around that dot. Now here, I'm going to rinse my brush and mix a little bit of that with that lighter color that I already had, and then keep going. And I'm being careful to touch just a tiny bit so that it'll bleed into the next color. And then I'm going to rinse my brush again, do the same thing. I'm just working lighter and lighter. Now I maybe had a little bit too much paint, which is why this is bleeding completely out. The reverse of this is if we were to go back and add the color later, we'll have a little bit more control over where it is. But if you like those bleeds, this is a good way to do the rose. Okay, while we wait for this to dry, let's do one more, and I'm going to make this rose a little bit more ruffled. So we're starting the same way. And then when we get out to the outer petals, instead of continuing that same kind of brush stroke that we've been doing, we're going to just ruffle this a little bit. So they're more irregular around the outside. to kind of make it look like a ruffled rose instead of a perfect round rose. Now I realize it's darker around the outside. We're gonna wait for this to dry, and then I'll go back in to the center here to darken that up so that the center is what's the darkest, not the outside. And while the paint's still wet, you can still kind of manipulate where you want your petals to go. Like if right here I noticed it needed a little something out here to help round it out a little bit more. While it's wet, you can still do that. Once it's dry, it's harder to go back because you'll have a hard edge. So if I go back here, it's not blending seamlessly. So you want to pay attention to that. Okay, let's let these dry and let's do a 3/4 facing rose. So we're going to approach it the same way, but instead of starting in the center, you're starting with it facing outward. So whichever angle you want your rose to face, I'm going to have mine facing this way. And it's going to be more of an oval shape rather than a round circular shape. And then here, you're seeing more of this side rather than the back. So I'm going to continue building around this side rather than back here. I'm going to add little strokes up at the top to help round everything out. But as far as building out the flower, it's all going to be down here. And you could do these a couple different ways. So I'll show you the simpler approach first. All right, so there you go. You've got the center here. We're going to go back and darken that so that it helps define the shape. But I've built it out into an oval, and then rather than build around the whole thing like we did up here, I'm just building down and around like that. Let's do one more in kind of our ruffled style. So starting the same kind of way and then building down. Now when we get to this point, instead of just kind of finishing it off, I'm going to add those ruffly petals here at the bottom. And I'm going to make sure they kind of fan out and kind of hug that shape we've already got going. Because if they don't hug that shape, they'll just look disconnected and it won't look realistic. All right, there you go. Like I said, we're going to go back and define all of the shapes in a minute, but okay, now one more, we're going to do that side-facing rose. And I'll do a simpler version and then the ruffled version. So simple version, when it's side-facing, you're not really going to see any of the top. You're just going to be seeing the sides here. We'll go back and define some of the shape up here so it doesn't look like that blob. And then the more ruffled approach, we're going to start at the top here and build the petal. Now you can see I'm leaving just a little bit of white space. That just helps it so it doesn't look like a blob. And then I'm just adding those ruffly petals to the bottom. All right, so now I'm gonna go back and add some depth to these up here. And with my alizarin crimson, I'm being careful not to put my hand right in that rose. I'm just gonna go right over the top. And then to blend it out, I'm rinsing out my brush, kind of dabbing it dry a little bit, and then just barely touching over the top of the outer strokes that I just made. And that helps that just kind of blend. Okay, and we're gonna do the same thing over here. Oh, and this paint is still wet, so I'm just gonna kind of tap the color in right here and then do a couple little defining strokes. And I'm not going over exactly where I was before. These are completely new strokes. And then I'm doing this just to help them blend into the rest of the flower that I've got going on. And you can use the same way to build these with multiple colors rather than just with one color. So if you wanted to start with, say, yellow in the center and build out to pink or peach or even within the same color family, sometimes I like to add in like a yellow slowly, and so it turns a little more peach or something like that, so that you have a really nice looking rose. Now I'm paying attention when I add this extra depth to where the center of the rose is. So up here, the center of the rose is basically the entire middle. The center of this rose is going to be where it's the tightest. The tighter petals are going to look darker. Now up here, it's not going to be much that we're seeing. Let's see, like maybe a couple little things up here, if that. Now we could take it a step further, and once this is all dry, go in with an even deeper color. I've got a purple mixed over here that's really, really deep. I'll do it over here so you can see. And that's just going to make the center even darker, but that's a personal preference thing. That's not a requirement. At least have a little bit of depth, but you don't have to like take it a step further and do a ton of depth. It really just depends on your personal style and your preference.